everything that I'm about to say I ran through the fact checker, given that I've got documentation going on here. Copious documentation.
So are you going to speak to us about the Wonders of Real Life?
Yeah, actually I wanted to give a 2-hour dissertation, but I was outvoted.
I know where all the rum went.
She's using those big words again.
Gary should know around me, it's got to be simplified, you know?
I posted, find out why is the rum gone at 11 o'clock? Gary Chambers is in it.
That's right. Well, we'll just let them come on in as their desire and the ebb and flow of the tides get here. There they come.
Hello.
Do people know that we went 6 away?
We are sort of...
I wanted to thank you all for coming and allowing me to give my PhD dissertation in front of you here at this place. There's a couple of things that we're going to touch on, and I'm actually going to keep this as brief as possible to make it interesting, if not terribly humorous, but at least everything that you see around you will have a whole new context in which to put it. First and foremost is the part of New Orleans Square, the part that you're actually standing in. Everything that is around the quaint streets that you see is actually the former chicken plantation. When the park opened in 1955, this was actually going to be a restaurant that served up chicken dinners. In point of fact, when New Orleans Square was under construction, they still handed out chicken dinners through a wood window, just like a drive-thru. You'd walk up and you'd be handed your chicken dinner at that time. So it was only until the New Orleans Square actually opened that it had actually ceased, and the restaurant was replaced by now that you know as the Blue Bayou Restaurant. If you think in terms of what is beyond just the imminent area of New Orleans Square and going that direction towards the Haunted Mansion, background music. Yeah! A disco version of Phantom of the Opera. Wow! That's cool. Just beyond the berm. Does everyone know what the berm is in Disneyland? I see some nodding heads, most yes, some no. Okay, the berm is actually the perimeter of the park that's demarcated by the railroad. When you go into Pirates of the Caribbean, you actually go down, not because it was designed just as a cool part to get Brian Summers wet, just happens to be a happy coincidence, but it's actually born out of necessity. There wasn't enough real estate inside the park itself to actually have the show. So when you go down by a waterfall or down by a stretch room, you're actually entering into the show building, which is outside the perimeter of the park, what they refer to as beyond the berm. So now you have that little piece of trivia. The architecture that you see in New Orleans Square was actually born out of Walt's fascination with New Orleans. He and his wife Lillian used to go on vacation down in New Orleans, and he had a fascination with the city because of its architecture, its heritage, its history, its people. It was
with beads.
the beads, who can forget the beads? In actuality, he actually went into a antique store, allegedly on Magazine Street, a very popular merchant circle in New Orleans, and picked up an antique cage with a mechanical bird inside. Brought that back to his Imagineers and said, I want to know how this works, and that became the inspiration for what we now know as the Tiki Room. Now what was on the books for New Orleans Square actually began in the 50s. So in the late 50s, this was all ideas that he had germinating in his very fruitful mind, but it never could be executed until he had the technology to back it up. And what facilitated that was the 1964-1965 World's Fair. Who can tell me what attractions came out of the 64-65 World's Fair? Name one.
Cars.
What was that?
Cars.
Lincoln. That was actually sponsored by the state of Illinois. It's a Small World, which is sponsored by Pepsi for UNICEF.
The dinosaurs in the train.
The Dinosaurs in Primeval World, which was part of which attraction at the 64-65 World's
It was
Fair?
the history of, or the car thing.
It was the Ford Pavilion, that's right. And the last one, which is no longer here, the Carousel of Progress, sponsored by General Electric. Exactly. So all of those attractions, save for one, were actually exported to Disneyland at the end of the 1964-1965 World's Fair. But what's most important out of all of that is that the technology that he had developed with his Imagineers for the audio animatronics actually borne the fruit to be able to have more in the terms of interactive entertainment inside the parks, and that is what inspired Pirates of the Caribbean. All of the artwork design that you see in Pirates of the Caribbean was actually the brainchild of Mark Davis. Does anyone know who that name is? He is.
We heard it yesterday.
Yes, very good. Mark Davis was an Imagineer later in his career, but he's also a prolific animator and director for the Disney films. And he was very well known for his sense of humor. And a lot of the elements that you see in Pirates of the Caribbean, especially the humorous gestures that you see, or the facial construction of these AAs, is born out of Mark Davis' sense of humor. His wife, incidentally, Alice Davis, was a prolific costumer, and in fact, she's responsible for all the costumes in It's a Small World. So if you want to go through the Pirates of the Caribbean attraction and you look at some of the art design that's there, for example, the painting that you see behind the bar, that was actually painted by Mark Davis himself. All of the elevations that you see are Mark Davis. So his stamp is all over that attraction, as well as the Haunted Mansion. The paintings that you see in the stretch room were actually by his hand. But the audio animatronics that were there was born out of Lincoln at the 1964-65 World's Fair, and by having that technology available, they were actually able to do the Pirates of the Caribbean. Now, the real reason why you're here is, of course, because you also know where runs from. Now, I'm just telling you why it runs from. And I'm not going to do it like this, because you wouldn't understand it. But I'll start with a quote. You've heard the line, 15 men on a dead man's chest, yo ho, yo ho. Well, the actual quote is, 15 men on a dead man's chest, yo ho in a bottle of rum. Drinking the devil had done for the rest, yo ho in a bottle of rum. Does anyone know where that quote comes from?
Small world.
Does anyone but Paul know where that quote comes from?
Treasure Island?
Treasure Island. The book or the movie? Which movie? The other one is, if the ancients drank wine, as our people drink rum and cider, it's no wonder we hear so many possessed with devils. That's a quote by John Adams. Now, in brief, I'm not giving you a dissertation of the history of rum, but what you do need to know is that rum is actually fermented from sugarcane. And the last leg of that process of getting sugarcane to the Caribbean, in which to ferment, was actually facilitated by Chris Columbus himself in 1493. It was brought out. From here on, I need to use my cheat sheets. It wasn't called rum at that time, though. That came later, and in 1672, probably descending from rumbouillon, a British slang term for an uproar or great tumult. This seems like a pretty accurate description. Before it was rum, it was actually known as kill devil. What makes the tie with piracy so solid is that it's actually a sailor's beverage. And the reason for that was because they were issued, this would be the British Navy, rations of beer. Well, the beer went bad. So when the distilled spirit of rum actually came into play, it had more staying power. It says, sailors, pirates, and Navy men alike had their own reasons for liking Kill Devil. Namely, they were sick of beer. But that isn't as unforgivable a sin as you may think. Beer was the sailors' only relief from the wretched conditions on board, but during long journeys it turned brackish and foul as it cooked in the sweltering holds of the ship. Rum was much more durable and proved so popular that in 1740 the British Royal Navy instituted something that pirates had been doing for decades, issuing a daily ration of a half pint of 160 proof rum. For more on the British Navy's quasi-sexual relationship with rum, see the British Royal Navy, page 204. A lot of this information comes out of Alcoholica Esoterica. This is a brilliant book that shows you the darker, seamier sides of many of the beverages and a lot of their history. And I will leave you with this passing useless information about rum. You want to stand up here and do this?
I want to sit back here and do this.
You're obviously having fun. In 19th century England, men would occasionally auction off their wives in exchange for
What can I get?
Oh my God.
Six proof.
Remember those comes the redhead.
And the last bit of trivia is in the Caribbean, rum is sprinkled on a newborn baby's forehead for luck. With that, I thank you very much for coming to me.